Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Sonoma County Focused Workshop. We are going to get started now. Thank you so much for being here. To start things off, I would like to introduce Sonoma County Supervisor and ABAG Executive Board Member David Rabbit. He will provide the welcoming remarks. Supervisor Rabbit.
Ursula, thank you so much. I apologize for not having the fancy background like my cohorts, and my computer would not allow me to have my a virtual background. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And like Ursula said, I'm a Sonoma County Supervisor. I'm an ABAG Executive Board Member. And we have to send our best wishes to Jake McKenzie. He was supposed to be with us tonight. He's a bit of a health thing, a dental thing that he's going through right now. So he's Roanoke Park Vice Mayor and an MTC Commissioner as well. So we're happy that you're joining us today for the workshop focused on Sonoma County. I want to start off by saying that we hope you, your family, and your loved ones certainly are safe and healthy during this very challenging time. This workshop is one of 9 county-focused workshops we have held. Given the requirement to physically distance, MTC and ABAG held all of the workshops digitally, as you can understand, and by telephone. And while some of the information presented today will be about Sonoma County, we welcome anyone really to participate. Today we will be seeking input on Plan Bay Area 2050 draft blueprint. That is a 30-year regional version that seeks to create a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area for all. The draft blueprint is the first draft of the Plan Bay Area 2050, integrating 25 resilient and equitable strategies that aim to make the Bay Area a better place in the areas of transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy. The blueprint is a critical step in the Plan Bay Area 2050 process, and we have engaged the Bay Area public over the past 2 years to get input on the strategies that we will review today. So again, welcome, and I will continue because I think Jake was supposed to go, but I am going to actually, nope, I apologize. We also want to acknowledge, I think, certainly the challenges that we're experiencing because of the pandemic. We also want to state our support of the Black community and all communities who are affected by violence and injustice that has claimed too many lives here in the Bay Area and around the country. As a regional agencies that focus on transportation, housing, the environment, and the economy of the Bay Area, it's our role to increase access to opportunity. And we do stand side by side with those working toward a fair and just society. And again, on behalf of MTC and ABAG, I want to thank you for spending a couple of hours with us to provide your input. And with that, I will turn it over to ABAG MTC Executive Director, Therese McMillan. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Supervisor Rabbit, and welcome to everyone this evening. This is the last of 9 county-focused digital workshops that we have held since mid-July. And I guess in many ways, you know, the last can be the best. So again, we're looking so forward to hearing from you and your thoughts on Plan Bay Area 2050 and the draft blueprint. Before we begin, though, I would like to underscore and emphasize what Supervisor Rabbit highlighted, which is MTC and ABAG's commitment to equity. And I'd like to mention in particular the equity platform that both ABAG and MTC endorsed and adopted, and is a framework for both agencies in terms of infusing equity throughout all of our regional projects and programs. For more information on the equity platform, the URL is listed here, but I think you will certainly appreciate how we have taken that commitment to lifting up equity in our work throughout the presentation that you will hear today. The Plan Bay Area 2050 draft blueprint is a culmination of 2+ years of work, an extraordinary effort on the part of our staff, our regional leadership in both agencies, and particularly you. We have been talking with the public throughout those 2.5 years and listening and hearing about your thoughts for the vision of the Bay Area and the strategies that would bring that vision to a reality. So the information that we will present today is a culmination of all that input, and we are really eager to hear your thoughts this evening. So without further ado, I am going to introduce MTC ABAG staff member Ursula Vogler, who will walk you through the next steps in the workshop. And thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Therese, and thank you, Supervisor Rabbit. And our best wishes, of course, go out to Commissioner McKenzie. And it is our last workshop, yes, it's been a great run, and we appreciate you being here. I'm so happy to be joining you today, and here's an overview of today's workshop. First, MTC and ABAG planning staff members Dave Vaughton and Michael Germerod will introduce Plan Bay Area 2050 and its draft blueprint. This will include an introductory video that will help us provide the detail about the blueprint. Next, they will share findings from the strategies analyzed as part of the draft blueprint and review local impacts. We will pause for clarifying questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You may type your questions and comments there at any time during the workshop. Then they will walk you through our interactive poll activity. This is where we will use the Poll EV program, and we will explain how to use the program in the next slide. Our planning staff will then highlight important regional programs before moving into the question and answer period. Finally, we will wrap up by providing information on how you can access additional resources and provide additional input. Next slide. Before we dig into the presentation, I'd like to go over a handful of logistics for today's workshop. I want to note that the workshop is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to the Plan Bay Area website. To ensure all participants can provide input, everyone will be muted during the workshop. We encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so please type your questions or comments at any time during the workshop. Staff will answer questions directly in the Q&A feature or during key points of the workshop. We will also be using the polling platform Poll EV. To participate in the poll activity, you can use your smartphone, computer, or tablet. For an internet-enabled device, please use a web browser and go to pollev.com/MTCABAG302. When we begin the poll, the questions will populate automatically on your device. If you are joining us by phone only, you can still participate using the text option on your cell phone. To participate, please text MTC ABAG 302 to the number 22333. Please note that those of you joining us by phone only will not be able to enter questions and comments through the webinar platform. However, there is an opportunity to submit your comments verbally by phone. After the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we will enter into the official record. Again, you can participate in the poll by texting your responses to each question. There are additional ways to provide comments during the public comment period, which runs through Monday, August 10th. As I just mentioned, you can provide verbal comments by calling our comment line at 415-778-2292. Or if you have detailed written comments, please send them to info@planbayarea.org. We will post this information again at the end of the workshop. Last, please note that profanity or culturally insensitive comments will not be tolerated at any time. We look forward to a productive workshop, so let's dive in. We're going to start off with an icebreaker question so that we can all get comfortable with the polling software we are using. Please go to this Poll EV URL in your web browser now, pollev.com/MTCABAG302, or text MTC ABAG 302 to the number 22333. The question should be on your web browser now. We would like to know, pre-COVID-19, how did you typically get to work? If you're joining us by text, you can send your response by typing the letter associated with your answer choice. I'm going to read them now for you. For bus, select A. For subway or train, select B. For personal car, select C. For carpool, select D. For taxi or TNC like Uber or Lyft, select E. For bike, select F. For walk, select G. For ferry, select H. For other or not applicable, select I. Okay, we'll give you a minute to respond. And it looks like we have personal car is popular and bike is next. And that's it. Oh, other, very good. So hopefully this helps you to get acclimated. This is just a test question and it gets you acclimated to the poll EV system. So now I'm going to turn it over to our planning staff, Michael and Dave, who will walk us through the content of today's workshop.
Thanks, Ursula. We're excited to be here to talk with you and the public about the Plan Bay Area 2050 draft blueprint. We've worked to create a more comprehensive 30-year vision for the region's future, integrating transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. Today's presentation will first highlight the strategies at the core of the draft blueprint. Second, touch on some of the key regional and county outcomes. And third, seek your input on how to tackle challenges that remain prior to the final blueprint phase. As Supervisor Rabbit noted in his opening remarks, the draft blueprint is all about working towards the regional vision of a more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant Bay Area, not just for some, but for all Bay Area residents. Building on top of more than 2 years of work to develop the most resilient and equitable strategies to tackle our region's big challenges, the draft blueprint includes 25 bold strategies to make the region better for the next generation. It's important to underscore that these strategies are not near-term actions or legislative proposals. They're ideas for cities and towns, counties, the region, and the state to consider over the long term to address the challenges in the Bay Area and beyond. Of course, we'd be remiss in not acknowledging how profoundly the coronavirus pandemic has affected all of our lives right now. While we didn't predict the pandemic, we have been planning for uncertainty in our region's future. All of the strategies in the draft blueprint were stress tested against many of the unanticipated forces we're experiencing today. And the good news is they held up to those stress tests. Those forces range from higher levels of telecommuting to greater adoption of e-commerce to boom-bust economic cycles, among others. And while this summer is a great opportunity to ensure our strategies are best aligned for the post-COVID future that I think we're all looking forward to, it's important to note that some of the strategies are incredibly timely for the moment we're in right now. These include quick build bicycle improvements for a world where public transit has much lower capacity requirements, renter protections for families at risk of eviction, childcare subsidies and other services for our essential workers, and of course, expanded open space investments for a point in time where we are all too often seeking respite from sheltering in place. Now let's learn a little bit more about the full suite of draft blueprint strategies through a brief video. If you have trouble hearing or seeing the video, we have posted a link to the video in the chat. Again, please feel free to provide comments and questions in the Q&A box at any time, and we will answer them at set points during the workshop.
Hi, thank you for joining us. As we navigate these unprecedented times, we thank you for taking a moment to think about the future. The Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments are creating a plan to make the Bay Area more resilient in the face of unexpected challenges like the one we are experiencing now. How we react to these challenges is key to making the Bay Area more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. Over the next few minutes, we will outline our ideas for the future in a plan we call Plan Bay Area 2050. The regional vision for transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment for the next 3 decades. The heart of the plan, what we are calling the blueprint, is what we'll be focusing on today. Over the last 2 years, we asked people like you for ideas on solutions to meet the Bay Area's transportation and housing challenges and ensure the region's economic resilience and extraordinary natural beauty. We analyzed the most promising recommendations to come up with 25 proposed strategies, which together make up the draft blueprint. We're excited to share these strategies and hear how we can fine-tune them in the months ahead. We're looking to improve our transportation system by considering how we can maintain and optimize existing infrastructure, create healthy and safe streets, and enhance regional and local transit. These include integrating fare payment and trip planning for all Bay Area transit agencies, lowering speed limits, and redesigning local streets with community input to promote walking and bicycling, including 7,000 miles of new bike lanes and paths, and advancing transit projects with high ridership, such as a new Trans-Bay Rail crossing. We're committed to advancing bold housing strategies that can spur Bay Area housing production, including affordable housing in walkable communities. We can do this by reducing barriers to build housing near transit, transforming aging shopping malls and office parks into neighborhoods, and requiring more affordable housing units be built. To ensure the resilience of our region's economy, we're exploring how we can increase wages and shift the location of jobs by retaining industrial lands that can help us maintain a healthy manufacturing sector, discouraging development of new office parks in areas not well served by transit by imposing a fee on new developments, and expanding a 50% child care subsidy to all low-income households with children under 5, allowing more parents to remain in or enter the workforce. And to protect the natural environment that makes the Bay Area so unique, we are considering how we can reduce risks from hazards and minimize our impact on the environment by adapting to sea level rise in our coastal and bayside communities, expanding our climate program, which implements innovative projects to reduce transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions, and ensuring development is focused within existing city boundaries. Thank you for joining us. Please engage with us on the plan by visiting planbayarea.org or on Facebook and Twitter at MTC PATA. Your input will help us create the final blueprint, which will feed into Plan Bay Area 2050. Thank you.
So our apologies on the technical difficulties there and the joys of our Zoom world we're living in right now. Hopefully you're able to hear some of that. If you weren't able to, please just check out the link and provide it in the chat. The video is available on YouTube and on the planbayarea.org website. So let me just briefly touch on what you heard about, giving you a quick summary of those 25 strategies spanning transportation, housing, the economy, and the environment. So they really fall into 9 key categories. The draft blueprint maintains and optimizes our existing transportation infrastructure while redesigning our streets and investing in public transit. It spurs housing production at all income levels and encourages more affordable housing in all communities. It also strives to improve economic mobility through childcare subsidies and jobs programs, as well as through strategies to shift the location of jobs. And last but not least, the draft blueprint invests in sea level rise protections, home retrofits, and protections for our natural and agricultural lands. Ultimately, all of the strategies in the draft blueprint work together as a package to make our region more resilient and equitable in the years ahead. And if you would like to learn more about any of them, check out our website for a convenient booklet which describes them. Now, of course, this is not the first time we've done public engagement for Plan Bay Area 2050. In fact, in fall 2019, one of our prior rounds of outreach, we got nearly 13,000 comments from pop-up workshops across all 9 counties, as well as through an online tool known as the Mayor of Bayville. We were pleased to see the level of support for taking bold actions to make the region a better place for future generations. 90% of the comments we received at that time were supportive of the strategies ultimately integrated into the draft blueprint. We know that your feedback today will help us further improve the final blueprint, which is slated for release this fall. And it's a great opportunity to focus our strategies to more directly address the needs of the post-COVID era. Let's talk a little bit about the draft blueprint and potential outcomes for the Bay Area. Combined, the 25 strategies make significant progress on some key regional issue areas. Of course, they don't solve all of our region's problems, and that's why we're gathering here for the workshop, so you can give us feedback on how to move the needle even further. Let's start with housing. One notable highlight is that the draft blueprint's housing and transportation strategies would enable us to start reversing the decades-long trend of rising unaffordability in the Bay Area. As of 2015, the average Bay Area resident spent 57% of their household income on housing and transportation. But by enabling more housing growth near transit and in communities with well-resourced schools, we're projecting a forecasted reduction of 9 percentage points to 48% of household income by 2050. This reduction is even greater for low-income households, driven by a significant number of permanently affordable new homes we call deed-restricted affordable housing, as well as by income-based discounts for tolls and transit fares. Funding in the draft blueprint enables the construction of over 400,000 of those permanently affordable homes. And that helps with those affordability benefits for those who are least able to afford the Bay Area's high housing costs. Furthermore, a lot of the new growth is focused in walkable communities with frequent nearby transit service, enabling more people to walk, bike, and take public transit. By 2050, we can forecast that 43% of Bay Area households would be able to walk to a high-frequency public transit line with service of every 15 minutes or better. Now, on the environmental front, there's more good news. The investments in bicycle infrastructure and speed limit reductions that were discussed in the video could save more than 1,500 lives over the 30-year planning period. And while this is certainly not enough to get to zero fatalities by 2050, it is a meaningful step forward to address the deaths on our region's road system. With regards to hazards, such as earthquakes, sea level rise, and wildfires, retrofits to homes, as well as seawalls and levees included in the draft blueprint, address 100% of all homes at high risk of damage in an earthquake, as well as 98% of all homes threatened by sea level rise over the 30-year time horizon. Lastly, despite the significant tax increases that are required to pay for many of these strategies, tax increases that I would note primarily affect businesses and higher income residents. We're seeing that Bay Area businesses would remain positioned for further growth in the decades ahead, even as we face a major recession today. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael Germerod, who will walk through the outcomes of our analysis.
Thanks, Dave. So let's dig into a few more details related to the draft blueprint. The Bay Area is expected to grow by 2.7 million people and 1.4 million new jobs over the planning time horizon. To ensure that this additional growth does not lead to continued increases in housing costs, it's essential that we produce enough affordable housing to meet this demand, as well as to address the overcrowding and displacement that we see today. For some households, this means market rate construction, and for others, we need to have public subsidies to ensure the rent or mortgage is within reach. To do this, the draft blueprint includes 1.5 million new housing units, including over 400,000 permanently protected housing units for the lowest income households. Importantly, the draft blueprint includes 1 new home for every 1 new job. This slide shows where that growth might occur with the strategies included in the draft blueprint. You can see on the left side that 41% of all new housing growth is forecasted for Santa Clara County, the heart of Silicon Valley. Also, 27% of the growth is being forecasted for the East Bay and 20% for San Francisco and the Peninsula. The North Bay continues to have relatively limited growth. Approximately 14% of all new housing units would be in the North Bay. On the right side, you can see a breakdown of job growth. The trend here, also rather similar, shows a significant proportion, 44% of all new jobs, located in Silicon Valley, with continued clustering in the region's largest job center. Job growth is more limited in other parts of the region, but there's also significant growth in Alameda County, San Francisco County, and San Mateo County. Important, 70% of the housing growth is in areas within a half mile of frequent transit, and 50% of all new jobs are located in those areas as well. As noted earlier, this is why much of the region's growth is focused in walkable places near public transportation. The draft blueprint also includes a breakdown of where growth might occur on a more localized level, as you can see here for Sonoma County. The majority of housing growth is anticipated in central Sonoma County in places like downtown Santa Rosa, with some growth also occurring in the northern and southern portions of the county in places like downtown Petaluma. On the jobs front, the county adds just over 40,000 jobs pretty much evenly spread across the north, central, and southern Sonoma County areas, creating jobs for both current and future residents. Ultimately, this growth pattern would provide Bay Area residents more choices in terms of their transportation. We anticipate 17%, or roughly 1 in 5 Bay Area workers, would change their commuting patterns as a result. The pie chart on the left side shows the commute trip breakdown in 2015, where 75% of commuters used an automobile to get to and from work. In 2050, with the help of the full set of draft blueprint strategies, the automobile share decreases, with telecommute, walking and biking, and transit all increasing their shares. In addition to significant growth in telecommuting, we also see more Bay Area residents choosing these other forms. We know that climate change is creating huge challenges for our region, as it is bounded by water on nearly all sides. Plan Bay Area 2050 is the first long-range plan that integrates sea level rise adaptations to make sure that communities are not flooded due to sea level rise. On the left, you can see a breakdown of the number of units at risk from sea level rise, and also the share of those units that are protected. Most notably, San Francisco, Marin, and San Mateo counties all have large numbers of housing units at risk due to sea level rise. But in those counties, as well as most other counties in the Bay Area, a system of levees, horizontal levees, marsh restoration, and other sorts of environmental adaptations ensure that nearly all of the homes in those communities are protected from flooding. In total, the protections in the draft blueprint protect 89,000 homes from flooding, with just 2,000 homes still at risk, and over 160,000 jobs are protected, with just 10,000 remaining unprotected. The strategies also include 100,000 acres of marsh restoration, as well as protection or elevation of major highway segments and rail corridors through 2050. So what do these investments mean for your community in terms of infrastructure improvements? On the transportation side, the draft blueprint includes investments that would increase the frequency of buses in Sonoma County, extend the SMART train to Windsor, and finish the last gap in the Marin-Sonoma Narrows. There are also investments called for to ensure the entire SR 37 corridor remains above sea level, including the Lakeville Highway, as well as thousands of acres of marsh restoration and adaptation, contributing to the regional goal of 100,000 acres of wetlands. While we make a lot of progress in the draft blueprint advancing equity, improving affordability, and protecting the Bay Area's environment, we're still falling short on one central environmental goal: addressing climate change. Plan Bay Area 2050 is required by state law to include strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 19% per person by the year 2035. From tolling the region's freeways to enabling more growth near BART stations and more, the draft blueprint strategies we've showcased today move the needle quite a bit. We estimate that they could yield up to a 12 percentage point reduction as a result of all the strategies combined, but again, that state target is 19%. This means the remaining gap of roughly 7 percentage points will need new or expanded strategies in the final blueprint to close that gap. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Leslie, who's going to take us through our first round of Q&A.
Great, thank you, Michael. I'll take it initially. I'd like to introduce my public engagement colleague, Leslie Lara Enriquez, who will manage the questions that will be answered by Dave and Michael. So if you haven't already, please type your questions into the Q&A box and the planners will answer them. As a reminder, for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question as part of this meeting. Jot your questions down now, and after the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we will enter into the official record. You can also send us an email at info@planbayarea.org. Okay, I'll turn it over to Leslie now.
Thank you both. So we have not received any questions yet. We'll give you a few seconds to input any clarifying questions that you have now. If no questions come in, we'll move forward with the presentation, but please do note that we do have another Q&A period at the end of the meeting. So if our presentation to right now has not prompted any questions. I'm sure the rest of the presentation may, so feel free to enter any right now. Looks like we have a quiet group tonight. There we go. We got one question from Tom. Why aren't you planning to meet the greenhouse gas goals?
I'll take that question. So Tom, we want to meet, if not exceed, the greenhouse gas target. The 25 strategies that were approved for study in February got us a good chunk of the way there, but clearly they're not enough. And so we'll be seeking your input tonight, as well as input from stakeholders and policymakers across the region over the course of this summer to inform additional or modified strategies, which we hope can get us to that target. It is a challenging target to meet, but with some additional bold action, we think we can get there.
Great, thank you, Dave. I have another question. Is Sonoma County's growth proportional to its share of the Bay Area population?
So I believe it is, the growth amount is slightly higher than the current population share versus the rest of the region. Just off the top of my head, Sonoma County has in the ballpark of 400,000 residents, and we're a region of about 8 million people. So that's about 5% of the region's population, and we are projecting that Sonoma would take on about 6% of the growth.
Great, thank you, Dave. We have a question from Kari. Do you have further breakdown of the geography versus housing and job growth? The breakdown of the geography isn't quite how most Sonomans identify with different parts of the county.
Thanks for the question, Kari. Unfortunately, this is as detailed as we get in terms of the breakdown of growth in the draft blueprint. It is a regional plan. This is not an allocation of housing to any jurisdiction. This is about the high level growth pattern in the region. So I think we recognize that, we're trying to get to some localized detail here, reflecting, breakout of Petaluma versus Santa Rosa versus the northern towns and cities in Sonoma. And that's what's shown on the maps in the presentation.
Great, thank you, Dave. We have a question from Philip. COVID has shown that working from home is possible. Public transit use has declined. Why are we going to spend money on winding highways and public transit?
So I can tackle this one. I think it's a great question. Right now, so many of us are spending so much time at home. We're interacting through the internet and getting things done. But I do want to provide a little bit of context. So first of all, not everyone has that option. And the people who still have to keep commuting are often lower income workers who provide essential services. About half the region's workforce can't work from home. It's just not an option for the type of job they do, whether they're a surgeon at a hospital or someone working in food service who needs to be there in person. The other thing to remember is commuting is not the only thing we do on our region's roads and transit systems. So, less than a quarter of all trips in the region are actually commute trips. And of course, right now, we're not doing as many of those, maybe you might say, discretionary trips to go spend time with friends and family and go out for dinner at a restaurant or whatever other trips are part of your normal routine. Those are probably more limited now too. But in the future, we need to make sure we have transportation options so you can do those things, unless you would like to, Zoom with friends and family after COVID is over.
Great, thank you, Dave. We don't have any other questions. We'll give folks maybe another 10 seconds to input questions. All right, great. Thank you all for your great questions. And thank you to Dave for answering them. They will be back later to answer more of your questions, as I mentioned. We're going to switch gears now to our interactive part of the meeting. and we're going to use the polling software we used at the start of the meeting. So I'm going to turn it back to Dave and Michael to remind us how to use the polling software and then walk us through the questions.
All right, thanks, Leslie. Okay, this is my favorite part of the workshop. This is where we get a chance to hear from all of you. So to get ready to share your feedback, you're going to need to go to pollev.com/MTCABAG302. And we're going to go through each question one by one tonight. For those of you participating by phone only, on your cell phone, you're going to send a text message to the number 22333. And in the body of the message, you're going to type MTCABAG302 and then send. If you're texting, the question will not show on your phone, so we'll read out the question and the answer choices for you each time. Let's get started. All right, so challenge number one for this evening is related to affordable housing. Obviously a key topic area, and as we noted earlier, the additional housing units that would be generated would be roughly 4 times the amount of all deed-restricted affordable housing that exists in the Bay Area today. So to just give you a sense of some of the other strategies we integrated on this front, it included allowing a greater mix of housing types and densities in growth areas, generating that funding I just spoke about to produce affordable housing, but also to protect existing affordable housing and to protect our renters from displacement, and requiring developers to build more affordable units as part of their new developments. And yet, despite all these actions, there would still be hundreds of thousands of low-income households in the future, especially with rising income inequality, that would lack access to permanently affordable homes. So the challenge area here is, how do we create more permanently affordable housing, especially in areas with well-resourced schools, amenities, and transportation options? So here's your first polling question. Please identify which of the potential strategy ideas shown below should be included in the final blueprint to make the Bay Area even more affordable. You can select as many as you would like. So press A to invest in constructing more affordable housing units. Press B to accelerate redevelopment of aging malls and office parks with significant shares of affordable housing. Press C to expand capacity for new housing in communities with well-resourced schools and good access to jobs. Press D to advance innovative approaches to reducing housing construction and financing costs. And if none of these ideas works for you, feel free to press E for none of the above. There will be an opportunity on the next slide to provide your own ideas and strategies. These options are really here to just get you thinking about some of the options out there to address this challenge. Just so you know, if you're doing this by text, you'll need to send each letter choice as individual text messages in the same text thread. So with all that information, Michael, what are we seeing in the initial results?
Well, it looks like this advanced innovative approaches to reducing housing construction and financing costs is getting some attention from folks. We know that there's increasing interest in a lot of different cities in the region and from developers to explore modular housing. And some folks we've been talking to recently have also been talking about some financing tools, whether it's land banking or some kind of co-ownership models that might reduce some of the financing costs for housing. What else are you seeing?
Well, I think I'll just note, since this is our 9th and final workshop, it's interesting to see how Sonoma County compares to other places. There's been a lot of interest in option A in a number of other counties, those direct investments. But I think what we're seeing here tonight is, how can we do more with the money that's already available? How can we build more units with that funding? So I think that's really great feedback. Why don't we move on to the free response section here for challenge number 1. So now we get to hear from you on some additional ideas. What else would you like us to take into consideration in terms of strategies to create more affordable housing in the Bay Area? While you type in your answers, I'll share some thoughts that we received in focus group meetings with historically disadvantaged communities across the region. So some things we've been hearing include the fact that the affordable housing challenge isn't just about creating the units. It's about ensuring that folks understand how to access affordable housing that ultimately gets built. If you don't speak English, or maybe you have a student status, you might not be able to apply for that housing. There was also a lot of interest in programs that help lower income households buy a home or apartment to begin to provide that stability and a known path towards reducing wealth gaps that exist in our region and across the country. So I think we're still waiting for some of your comments to come in here on the topic of housing and affordable housing. So I'll pause and we'll let some of the feedback come in.
All right, so it looks like we're starting to have some trickle in. So the first comment we got was it's about putting that housing near transit areas, and that's definitely a key piece of the Plan Bay Area draft blueprint. Lots of strategies around identifying areas with high quality transit that already exists in the region, and a few investments to improve transit and others, and aligning future housing growth in those areas with over 70% of new housing going in there. There's also create nonprofit housing trusts, which have a mix of housing by age group, and finding ways to reduce opposition to locating affordable housing in existing communities. Are any of these other comments popping out to you, Dave?
Well, I'm seeing some other good feedback here about affordable housing in a more rural context. I think that's really interesting. We do know we can get more bang per buck with our affordable housing money in the North Bay than in other parts of the region. And so, but that's something that we need to think about. How can we make sure that the housing is close to transit? Like the commenter mentions, there's fewer transit-rich areas in the North Bay than in other parts of the region. Also, some of the feedback here about NIMBYs, basically, those are not in my backyard. I think these commenters are raising how do we overcome some of the local opposition to housing that often exists.
Yeah, it looks like that most recent comment on application process must be made doable. So just acknowledging that a lot of development processes can be quite arduous and could take a long time with a lot of requirements, and finding ways that we might be able to balance making sure that new development is going to kind of meet the community's expectations, but making sure it's not too onerous on folks who are trying to add housing. And most recent comment, put affordable housing on state-owned land, especially Sonoma Development Center. I know there's some interesting legislation at the state level that's similar to that might enable ideas like that.
I just want to lift up this comment here about small scale projects for affordable housing in rural areas. I think we absolutely understand. We're not talking about skyscrapers or tall buildings for affordable housing in Sonoma County. These would be developments that would be of the same scale and character as a lot of the existing communities that exist up in the county. Any other comments here, Michael, or should we move on to challenge number 2?
I think this, most recent comment has a lot of good detail for us to consider. I think a lot of communities are really looking for how new housing can support the affordability challenges here in the Bay Area, and a housing land trust type reverse mortgage might be a tool that could be used to embed younger families into well-established neighborhoods. So we're always really all ears when it comes to kind of new financing and ideas that are going to get at that affordability issue and provide increased stability in neighborhoods in the region. So thanks for that. But yes, let's go to the next section here. So you just focused on the housing and affordability challenges that remain in our region, and now we're switching gears to focusing on congestion and crowding. So included in the draft blueprint, we had a number of strategies to improve the region's transportation system. Strategies that advance high ridership transit projects and reform regional transit fare policies, as well as per mile tolling on congested freeways with transit alternatives. And yet traffic congestion and transit overcrowding continue to worsen in many freeway corridors and on many transit systems. So the challenge that we're about to pose to you is how can new or expanded strategies alleviate traffic congestion on suburban highways and reduce overcrowding on bus and rail lines. So this is going to follow the same format where first we're going to ask you a multiple choice version and then we'll open it up for free response. So for folks who are on the phone, I'm going to read the options for ways that the final blueprint can alleviate traffic congestion and reduce overcrowding on transit in the Bay Area. So if you want to support implementing all lane tolling on high traffic freeways with transit alternatives, text A. To invest more in world-class bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure to make it easier to reach local destinations without a car, press B. To build more express lanes with robust express bus service. That was a mouthful for me. Press C. Redesign public transit systems to provide more seamless transfers and focus service on high frequency routes. Text D. To extend regional rail services to new communities and increase the frequency of service. Text us E. To widen highways and expand interchanges to yield short-term congestion relief. Text F. And if none of those ideas you think will be helpful in alleviating traffic congestion and transit overcrowding, you can text G, which is none of the above. So what do you see here at first, Dave?
Well, looks like in first place is the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure up in Sonoma County. That's one of the really exciting strategies in the draft blueprint, 7,000 miles of trails and protected bikeways across the Bay Area. So that could mean hundreds of miles of bicycle infrastructure in Sonoma County alone. So that's pretty exciting. Looks like there's also some support here for making our the transit system more effective, improving those transfers between SMART and local buses, as well as maybe rail extensions, but also frequency increases on systems like SMART. So those are the strategies that are rising to the top.
So it looks like we've kind of hit a good spot here. So let's move to the free response portion. All right, so again, this is your opportunity to go ahead and share other ways that we can address the challenge of congestion and transit crowding. And just like we did last time, as you type in some of your ideas, I thought I'd share some of the ideas that came out of some focus group sessions that we had with disadvantaged communities in the region. So what we heard on this challenge is it isn't always about the big ticket strategies like big extensions or new lines. Ensuring simple things like elevators at stations or curbs are appropriate at stations is something that people would like to see, as well as having increased reliability of the trains or buses or ferries that people are using, so folks can reliably get to where they're trying to go. And then also just simple low-cost strategies like making sure crosswalk lines are bold so that drivers know where to stop at crosswalks. So we'll give you a few minutes here to type in ideas. We got a lot once we gave you guys some time, so go ahead and type in your ideas now.
So the comments are starting to flow in here, so I'm going to lift up some of these. I see one commenter mentions a VMT tax. We are looking at pricing some of the region's freeways in the draft blueprint to achieve the same sort of effect of, reflecting the price of driving and the impacts of driving in terms of congestion when people are making their travel decisions. Also a comment here about directing more funding to local transit in Sonoma County. That is something that is recommended for advancement into the final blueprint. And extending the Clipper Start program indefinitely. Also in the draft blueprint, those low-income discounts are expanded to all operators across the region, and that really helps with the affordability challenges with transit for our low-income residents. Michael, do you want to share some of the other comments we've gotten?
Yeah, so someone's jumping ahead to an upcoming challenge on the jobs housing balance. And so we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper. I think that's the 5th challenge we'll get to. Someone mentions employer benefit programs. I'm assuming that's in reference to things like a transit benefit program offered through employers. We also got an idea in some of our other workshop for expanded kind of benefits for employees who maybe bike to work. We also have a strategy here to see how Uber and Lyft can be reduced so more people will use public transit. So trying to maybe change some behavior and how those transit network companies like Uber and Lyft function. Anything else that you're seeing?
Well, not to come back to the same topic, but another commenter is bringing up road use charges as cost effective. That's what we've seen in our analysis as really one of the most powerful levers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, is to have some level of pricing on the system, at least to make auto trips more similar in terms of their cost to transit trips. Other commenters are bringing things up about funding for bike ped facilities. Yes, that's a high priority in the draft blueprint. We may go even further in the final to tackle this challenge, and those first and last mile connections are coming up as well.
Yeah, and that last comment is offering up that as a good way to get to the last mile using active modes, those bike and ped options that other folks are mentioning. Another person bringing up the jobs housing balance and kind of that key challenge of certain places in the region have a lot of jobs but not too much housing, and we actually have that fifth challenge is going to dive into that challenge a little bit further. So it looks like we've slowed down here, so why don't we move to challenge 3?
All right, so challenge number 3 this evening is related to displacement, which was once a challenge really focused in the biggest cities in the region, but over the past few decades, this has become a problem that's spread across all 9 counties, the displacement of our low-income and minority communities to the periphery of the region and beyond. So in the draft blueprint, we included a set of strategies to try to stem the tide here of this challenge, including further strengthening renter protections beyond state legislation, basically expanding San Francisco-style rent control policies outward across the 9 counties, reducing barriers to housing near transit and in areas of high opportunity, and expansions of childcare support for low-income families. That last strategy really can help to expand the income of our lowest income residents when they have children, and it might allow them to remain in place if they're able to keep their job and also have childcare services as well. And yet, despite these strategies and more, the risk of displacement in most Bay Area communities continues to grow over time. So here's the challenge. How can we ensure that our low-income residents and communities of color are not ultimately displaced to areas with limited access to opportunity? Okay, time to vote here. Which potential strategies do you think should be integrated into the final blueprint to address displacement risks in the Bay Area? And feel free to select as many as you would like. So press A to expand investment in the preservation of permanently affordable housing in communities facing displacement. Press B to ensure ample affordable housing is built in communities most at risk of displacement. Press C to implement workforce training programs to grow the middle class and make it easier to stay in place. And press D to dedicate and protect ample investments in schools, parks, and transit to improve quality of life in communities where displaced residents are moving. Press E if none of these strategies are of interest to you. So Michael, looks like the votes are coming in here. I'll turn it over to you for some quick analysis.
Yeah, it looks like fairly broad support for all 4, but the implement workforce training programs is seeing the greatest support. So folks looking more maybe at the income side at trying to make sure that lower income households have a path to the middle class, making it easier to stay in place. But with that said, it seems like all 4 are receiving pretty significant support.
Thanks, Michael. Looks like the votes are mostly in here, so type in your vote if you haven't already. We're going to now move over to the free response section here for displacement risks. So is there anything else or other strategies we should take into consideration to address displacement in the Bay Area? I'll note some of the feedback we got from our disadvantaged communities on this topic. Those focus groups identified that it's really important for folks with a poor credit history to have a means to rent within their community. They also identified that it's really important to have accessible legal support to make sure that renters are aware of their rights. So we'll pause for a few seconds here and let you type in some of your thoughts on this major challenge for the region.
We've got a few comments starting to come in right now. We have a strategy here to tax second homes. We know that's a more significant issue, particularly in North Bay communities and some of the more unincorporated parts of Sonoma County. Ensuring that there's a range of housing types and tenure in all communities across the county. I think that's something that a lot of folks are talking about in terms of not just having single family homes or apartment buildings, but also looking for duplexes and triplexes and accessory dwelling units that folks can fit into their backyards that might get at a lot of different affordability levels more naturally. Someone else is just holding on to hope right now. So I guess we'll rely on some other folks to come up with ideas.
Other comments, looks like one commenter is just underscoring the importance of housing costs and how that's created a lot of our displacement challenges. We agree, that's why we're working to bring down housing costs, but we're also looking for kind of a whole comprehensive suite of solutions to address this challenge. Also seeing a comment here about regulation to prevent gentrification while encouraging funds for development of affordable housing. And another commenter is mentioning it's important to ensure that communities provide the services and cultural assets for existing residents need and want within easy access. Great comment. Thank you for that.
Yeah, we've got another one here, making sure people are earning a living wage. I think that kind of goes back to the highest level comment on the previous slide, looking for workforce training programs to grow the middle class. A comment here on accessory dwelling unit construction can get up to $200,000. So, even some of those thought of lower cost strategies may really not be so affordable. So looking to see if there might be some innovative strategies to lower the cost of accessory dwelling units. Require new jobs and housing linkages. So as new jobs and office developments are being considered, making sure that there's linkages there to housing production. Over the past decade, there's been a lot more jobs added to the Bay Area compared to the housing units, which is one of the main reasons for the large increase in the cost of housing. Other folks also jumping in on increasing the minimum wage or providing a living wage. So other folks kind of getting at it through the income side.
I think the comments are starting to slow down here. So if you have any last thoughts on this one, please do send them along. But we're gonna now transition to challenge number 4 for the evening. I'll turn it over to Michael.
All right, so this is all focused on greenhouse gas emissions and how we might be able to further reduce the region's environmental footprint. So already included in the draft blueprint, there were strategies to implement per mile tolling, again on congested freeways. We highlighted that on the congested and crowding challenge. There are strategies to build complete street networks and implement reduced speed limits. So that would be reducing speed limits on both highways and more local streets. And that complete street network would provide thousands of miles of new protected bike infrastructure across the region. And then also ensuring a greater mix of housing types and densities near frequent transit. So again, for the new housing that is built in the region, really prioritizing a lot of that growth near high frequency transit, so those new residents have transit as a likely option. So despite those strategies that were included in the draft blueprint, we're only a little over halfway to the emission reduction goal. And so our question to you is, how might we further reduce transportation related greenhouse gas emissions to reach this critical climate goal? So go ahead and use the poll EV to help us answer the question on how we can reduce climate emissions in the Bay Area. So the first option that we're offering you is to expand electric vehicle and charging infrastructure subsidies, especially for lower income households. You can text A to show support for that idea. We could also postpone highway widening projects until a greater share of vehicles are electric. You could text B if you want to show support for that idea. Another one is charging parking fees to disincentivize driving, putting fees towards bicycle giveaways and free shuttles. That's C. Or requiring employers to implement mandatory work from home policies 2 or 3 days per week. If you like that idea, text D. If none of those ideas you think would be effective in reducing climate emissions, go ahead and select E, none of the above. So Dave, it looks like we've got maybe a clear standout number one.
Yeah, it looks like Sonoma County residents are most interested in the electric vehicle and charging subsidies. That's all an area where Sonoma really has led the way in the region with some aggressive, subsidies to help folks join the electric movement. So this strategy would help us further expand that across the region and offer deeper discounts for electric vehicles. But also some interest in the parking fees strategy, as well as mandatory work from home policies. So that's really interesting.
So it looks like we've stabilized here. So let's go ahead and move to the free response. So we're looking for other ideas that you think would help address the climate emissions in the Bay Area. So go ahead, take a few seconds here and start typing in some new ideas that you recommend. We've also heard from folks, I think particularly it's relevant in the COVID-19 shelter in place conditions that we're in. A lot of our CBOs mentioned some other environmental challenges around just having access to good green space and community space in their communities, and expressing a desire to make sure that all residents in the region have walking access to parks. And that should be a priority to make sure folks can get to key recreation areas without the use of cars. So that's something that we've heard in some of our focus groups to date. All right, we've got our first response coming in. Implement. Oh, Shoup proven. So an academic who's a big advocate of parking fees. Policies with proceeds targeted to block level amenities to help ensure retailers see direct benefits. Interesting idea to link parking fees with the businesses maybe nearby.
Looks like comments are coming in really quickly here, Michael. I'll try to lift up a few more of these. Suggestions about making transit areas that are car-free, subsidizing rooftop solar as a nice pairing with the electric vehicle strategy. Great point there on that. That's something that we'll be looking into for the final blueprint. Concern about parking fees affecting people who don't have another choice. That is a real area of concern with parking fees. And so I just want to acknowledge that, especially as we're trying to focus on equity in this plan. And other commenters are suggesting things like reducing parking requirements, building housing on parking lots, investing in public transit, locating affordable housing near that transit, all good suggestions. Many of these are things we have integrated into the draft blueprint, and really the question is, can we double down on them in the final blueprint to get us closer to that very important climate target?
Yeah, we've got another comment that's towards the bottom now, but really looking to employers to do more with how their employees are commuting, whether it's offering discounts to transit service, offering their own shared kind of bus services, as well as maybe incentivizing a greater share of time or employees that are working from home. Folks calling out the need to explore how Uber and Lyft impact emissions in the future. We did a little bit of analysis on how those types of companies impact, as well as autonomous vehicles, and some of our precursor work through the Horizon Initiative. But some of that research is on the MTC website, if you're interested there. Incentives for electric and hybrid autos. Yeah, so I think we saw a lot of support for that in the last question. And also, more support for remote work. And, I think a lot of people are excited about that option to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as kind of flatten those peak travel periods. So, typically our transit systems and highways and roads see a lot of action in those commute hours. And so that telecommute strategy could be effective in a few different ways.
I want to lift up another, I hate to be coming back to parking yet again here, but I wanted to lift up this great suggestion from this commenter, which we haven't heard at any other workshop to date. So thank you for this new idea. Equity offsets for low-income drivers who have no other suitable travel alternatives. It's an interesting idea. There might be some implementation challenges, but something I think we should think a lot about before including a parking strategy in the final blueprint. Also seeing photovoltaic carports over existing parking lots. That's a great suggestion, and incentives to make delivery trucks electric. And while we can't take credit for all of those due to the rules and regulations related to this target, they're all good strategies, and there may be things we want to integrate into the final blueprint regardless. Michael, it looks like the comments are slowing down here a little bit, so I'm going to suggest we move on to challenge number 5 for this evening.
Sounds good.
All right, so we made it to the 5th of the 5 big challenges for the region's future. And this one is related to jobs housing imbalance. So in the draft blueprint, we did try to tackle the region's jobs housing imbalance, and we actually made some headway on this topic. The housing strategies were very successful in moving housing closer to major job centers, especially in Silicon Valley. But on the other side of that equation, shifting jobs to where many existing residents live, the strategies just weren't sufficient to actually achieve many gains. Those strategies included assessing impact fees on new office developments, retaining key industrial lands, and creating incubator programs in economically challenged areas. Despite all that, the jobs continued to cluster in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, far from many existing residents. Now, here's the challenge going forward. How could more ambitious economic strategies be employed to shift jobs closer to existing housing-rich communities? So let's vote. Here are some ideas on how to address that challenge in the final blueprint. Press A to increase fees that discourage development of new office parks in job-rich, auto-oriented communities. Press B to expand business incubator programs to create new small businesses in housing-rich places. Press C to prohibit construction of new office buildings in communities that have many more jobs than homes. Press D to provide tax subsidies for employers to relocate middle-wage jobs closer to affordable housing. And if none of these strategies interest you, or maybe you think that this isn't the appropriate way to tackle the jobs housing imbalance, press E for none of the above. So why don't we give it a few seconds here to let some more votes come in, and then I'll turn it to Michael for some quick analysis.
Yeah, it looks like folks are looking more at an incentive, so provide tax subsidies for employers to relocate middle wage jobs closer to affordable housing, a little bit more than increasing fees or prohibiting more construction of office development in areas that already have more jobs than homes. But as I say that, things are starting to shift a little bit, but there's also, I think this is probably the largest share of none of the above that we've received. This is also a comment that folks were mentioning back on that connected and congested and overcrowding challenge. So I'm curious to hear what everyone thinks could be a more effective strategy.
Michael, I'll note, since this is our 9th of the 9 meetings, Sonoma County residents aren't alone in their recommendations on this strategy. Option D has proven popular in most Bay Area counties, with the notable exceptions of, I believe, Contra Costa and Santa Clara counties that wanted a more aggressive approach on the jobs housing imbalance. So I think we'll move on to the free response section here and let you give us your feedback on how to tackle this challenge. So is there anything else we should take into consideration to address the jobs housing imbalance in the region? For example, new and expanded strategies. I want to underscore some of the feedback we've gotten from our focus groups on this topic. And they've made some really great points about it's not just the number of jobs, it's the type of jobs. So it's not always helpful necessarily to move those high wage jobs to places elsewhere in the region, but we need a whole spectrum of different job types, high, medium, and low, in all different parts of the Bay Area. So there are opportunities for people regardless of their skills or specialties. So I think we'll let a few more comments come in, and then I'll turn it to Michael to share some of the initial feedback.
So it looks like someone had this comment loaded up as it showed up in that first second. So the idea here is, as cities issue new commercial development permits, that would enable, that would increase their housing target as well. And so for each 250 square feet of kind of office or commercial space that's there, you maybe are required to include a housing unit. So I think there's a few different kind of approaches to try and link jobs and housing, and this is a detailed idea for how we might be able to do that.
Thanks for that comment. I think we'll pause and wait for some more comments to come in here on challenge number 5. So it looks like we have this other comment here about housing targets being based on job growth, how areas don't want to necessarily be bedroom communities for San Francisco and Silicon Valley. Fair points there. I will note there is a parallel process we'll speak about in a few moments about the regional housing need allocation process, which is focused on housing allocations. Plan Bay Area 2050 is really based on public policies. It doesn't make assignments of housing allocations to any specific city. Other comments here, jobs focus on certain ideas because of the attractiveness of this area. Thus, it's important to make suburban areas more attractive with better schools, academic institutions, businesses, parks, and restaurants.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. It is something that we see with where jobs tend to locate more naturally, where they typically agglomerate, and there's they are linked to academic institutions, and so we hear your idea on maybe there's ways to create stronger environments for jobs in areas that we're trying to see that growth occur. And someone's noting here something that we're familiar with, that most of Sonoma County, more so than any other county, has the workers that work in Sonoma County also live in the county, and so it's unique compared to a lot of the other counties where there's a lot of commuting across county lines, whereas Sonoma, most of that's happening within the county.
Michael, I will just add, one of the interesting things in the draft blueprint is we are seeing a decent amount of housing growth in Sonoma, and also a significant amount of telecommuting growth. And so we do know that telecommuters often live further from job centers. And so a chunk of those new Sonoma residents may be disproportionately representing the growing share of telecommuters, maybe trying to enjoy that North Bay lifestyle while continuing to work for a South Bay company. So that's just kind of a side observation on this jobs housing imbalance challenge. I'll just read out one or two more comments here. Offering tax breaks for businesses that build housing and provide childcare. Great feedback. And another commenter mentions providing grant information for new job opportunities, especially for new college grads looking for employment in their desired area. So kind of an implementation suggestion there. And then one comment came in, we have been hearing this a lot, why can't Silicon Valley invest in satellite offices in more affordable places? That is something that's been talked about for many decades. In fact, it was floated back in the 1980s as a strategy. We will have to see whether that becomes popular after the COVID crisis. And another commenter is kind of going back into the transportation discussion, but mentioning that express buses to employment centers can help address the jobs housing balance. And there are investments in that mode that are proposed for the final blueprint.
Some quick mentions that someone's, recognizing that a lot of telecommuters, maybe the Venn diagram of with the affordable housing market isn't that big. So just noting that maybe there's going to be some unique connections or disconnections between those ideas, and also an idea to require new high impact job buildings to build housing. Healdsburg requires hotels to build housing to address this as an example. It's a great example that maybe we can dig into a little bit further. So why don't we go ahead and move to the final poll? And this one's going to be a little easier for you. It's just a final multiple choice. The free response is done at this point. So of the key challenges we highlighted, we'd like to know which you think is most urgent to be addressed in the final blueprint. And for this question, we're allowing you to select your top two. So if you're using your phone, you can text A to call out housing and affordability as one of the key challenges. You can text B for congestion and crowding, text C for displacement, text D for climate emissions, and text E for the jobs housing imbalance. So we'll give some time here for those votes to come in. Again, you can select your top two.
Well, it looks like we can see what the number one priority here is at this point, and I can report that it is consistent across the Bay Area that housing and affordability has been ranking in that top slot for the primary regional challenge. And based on some of the additional feedback here, looks like the two contenders for second place are climate emissions and the jobs housing imbalance. Surprising to see that last one, especially since Sonoma has a much better jobs housing balance in most places. We have seen in most counties that climate emissions has ranked number 2, although in a few places in the region, jobs housing imbalance comes up in that slot as well.
All right, so with that, it looks like we've stabilized here. So let's keep moving through the presentation.
Thanks, Michael. So before we turn to our final Q&A session, we know that many of you are not just interested in the next 30 years, but also initiatives that are tackling these challenges right now in the next few years. And thus we're spotlighting 3 other initiatives related to Plan Bay Area 2050 that you might want to learn more about. So let's start with transportation. One such effort on this front is known as the Transportation Improvement Program, which reflects local, regional, state, and federal funding priorities and decisions. It's a key document that's a 4-year clearinghouse of Bay Area transportation projects and their funding information. And it's focused on the next 4 years, really the early years of Plan Bay Area 2050. As the graphic shows on the next slide, MTC is always interested in new project ideas. These often get incorporated in our long-range plan, in this case, Plan Bay Area 2050. And then the Transportation Improvement Program hones in on the near-term priorities, specifically those that are moving towards construction and implementation. You can see a breakdown of the 2019 Transportation Improvement Program at the bottom of this slide, and we encourage you to check out the project website for more info. Let's turn to housing. One near-term initiative on the housing front is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process, referred to by its acronym, RHNA. Since 1969, the Association of Bay Area Governments, under state law, has worked with both state and local governments to identify the amount of housing growth that cities, towns, and counties need to plan for over the next 8 years. After the completion of the RHNA process, each local government updates their housing elements and shows how it would accommodate its share of regional housing need. For the upcoming cycle, the Bay Area will need to plan for over 441,000 new housing units over an 8-year time period, a key piece of the envisioned 1.5 million new homes by 2050. The RHNA process is already well underway, but there's some key milestones happening in the months ahead. This fall, in sync with the final blueprint approval for Plan Bay Area 2050, the allocation methodology for RHNA will be considered for approval by the ABAG Executive Board, and that allocation needs to be consistent with the blueprint you heard about today. Further steps will be taken in 2021, leading to a final allocation, and then updates to local housing elements by January 2023 in many Bay Area cities and towns. Go to abag.ca.gov to learn more. Finally, I'll note some initiatives from our regional partners, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District and the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. The Air District created the Clean Air Plan last in 2017 with regional strategies to protect public health and the environment. It also funds grant programs to help local jurisdictions, businesses, and the public access funds to improve air quality. 2 programs include the Clean Vehicle Rebate Program and the Clean Cars for All program, which provides low-income families money to scrap their old vehicle and get a grant to buy a new electric vehicle, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, or even a Clipper card. And BCDC has a new program called Bay Adapt, which is a 6-month effort to develop and adopt a regional strategy to protect from rising sea levels. As we integrated sea level rise into Plan Bay Area 2050 for the first time, we worked closely with the Bay Adapt team to understand both the impacts of sea level rise and also the types of strategies needed to protect our region's shoreline. To learn more, check out the websites shown on this slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to my colleague Ursula, who will facilitate our Q&A.
Sorry, Dave. I will actually.
Leslie, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Okay, so it looks like we've received a couple of comments, but I just want to give folks a few more seconds to input your questions into the Q&A box if you haven't already. Sorry, just getting my bearings. Also, you can as a reminder, for those of you joining us by phone only, you will not be able to ask a question as part of this meeting. Jot your questions down now. And after the workshop, you can call our comment line at 415-778-2292 and leave us a message with your comments, which we'll enter into the official record. And also you can submit detailed written comments via email to our email address info@planbayarea.org. Okay, great. It looks like we have a question from Mary. How can concerns about specific PDA proposals be addressed, specifically Sonoma Springs specific plan?
Thanks, Mary, for that question. We have gotten a few comments about the Sonoma specific plan PDA, and I'll note that the ABAG board approved that PDA previously. Generally, local jurisdictions are in the lead when it comes to PDA nominations, revisions, or removals. So we'd encourage you to work with your local jurisdiction and continue dialogue with them about your concerns. So that would really be our recommendation for you as we move forward with Plan Bay Area 2050.
Great, thank you, Dave. We have a question from Victoria. Will we be answering the questions submitted in advance? Yeah, we can answer any questions you have. If you input them into the Q&A box now, Dave and Michael can help answer your questions. So we have quite a bit of time remaining for our schedule, for the time we schedule for the workshop. So please, if you have questions, enter them now into the Q&A box. Okay, we have a question from Paul. MTC relies upon the counties to provide notice to include areas such as PDAs in submission for Plan Bay Area 2050. Why does MTC feel no responsibility if such notice was ever given to communities in Sonoma County?
So Paul, I think we hear your concerns. I can't specifically speak to all of the hundreds of different PDAs, PCAs, PPAs, and the like across the region. That's why local jurisdictions play such a big role. These are locally nominated places for future growth. So again, we would encourage you to connect with local planners who would be best positioned to answer your questions.
Great, thank you, Dave. Another couple comments from Paul. Convince SCTA to increase frequency of buses on existing lines and try free buses. And then also work with communities to identify and design affordable housing in old existing communities. Sonoma County has a history of covertly adding such affordable units without notice to the community. Thank you, Paul, for your comments. We have a question from Victoria. If no public discussion or notice was given prior to county nominating an area, what recourse do residents and homeowners have other than litigation to not have their homes and land included in a PDA?
So the PDA nomination process almost entirely occurs on the local level. We do have an application process with different requirements for local jurisdictions, but each local jurisdiction takes different approaches to nominating those places. Some places have done a robust series of workshops, others do a more limited set of engagement. So again, we would encourage those that have feedback on a specific PDA to talk to the jurisdiction where that PDA is located. Again, those planners will be best positioned to discuss your concerns.
Great, thank you, Dave. We have a question from Bobby, and then please do keep your questions coming. Are there any plans to financially support or assist the SMART train or Golden Gate Transit or other mass transit?
Great question, Bobby. Obviously, there's a lot in the news right now about our region's transit system and the financial challenges and ridership challenges it's facing. MTC is playing a key role in convening a blue ribbon transit recovery task force that is looking at this very issue and helping to distribute federal monies that can help our local transit operators. From the perspective of Plan Bay Area 2050, we're looking over the next 30 years and how we can help our operators. And the draft blueprint includes monies to continue operations of all our systems, to get them back to their 2019 service levels in the years ahead, so we can have that more robust SMART service that we got to experience for all of about 2 months in January and February, to bring that back so that way we can enjoy those 30-minute frequencies at peak hours and those more seamless connections down in Larkspur. I'll also note that on the sea level rise side of the plan, and maybe Michael can speak to this briefly, we're working to protect our regional rail systems from flooding. Michael, did you want to add anything about that with regards to SMART?
Yeah, so included in that adapt to sea level rise strategy that is in the draft blueprint, there are protections that would provide kind of near-term and mid-term flooding protection to the SMART rail. sections both in Marin and Sonoma counties. So that's going to be an important investment for SMART to make sure that that rail system is above water long into the 21st century.
Thanks, Michael.
Great, thank you both. We have another couple of questions and a comment on the topic of PDAs. The comment first is, I would encourage MTC ABAG to increase accountability of counties, specifically Sonoma County, to act responsibly in PDA proposals to improve outreach and partnership with communities. And then a couple of questions from Victoria. Any vetting procedure MTC uses to make sure the county followed a democratic, inclusive process in their process? And is there anyone at MTC who is responsible for making sure nominated areas meet MTC's criteria to qualify as a PDA, and who in particular?
So let me tackle a few of those points there. So first, to Mary's point about the accountability of counties, that's great feedback for us. We go through this process every 4 years, and while the window for submitting new PDAs has now closed, we'll be back talking about these growth geographies, including priority development areas, in a few years for the next iteration of Plan Bay Area. So that's good feedback for us. With regards to Victoria's questions, I'll note that all the PDAs have to be approved at a public meeting where there's opportunities for public comment on that item. And so they are voted on in public forums with opportunities for public comment. So that is a key criteria that helps to support the democratic process that you're noting there. And lastly, I'll note that we do review proposals to make sure they meet the criteria for qualification as a PDA. And all of the PDAs that were approved earlier this year for inclusion in the draft and final blueprint did meet those standards. So I just want to note that we do review the PDAs, make sure they have the basic transit services, that they're not locations that are in farmlands or other locations that would be ineligible for PDA status.
Thank you, Dave. Again, on the subject of the PDAs, follow-up comment from Victoria. It sounds like that never happened for the SSP. There wasn't a public meeting. And then a question from Paul. Our PDAs were approved under a consent calendar with no allowance for public input. What do you think of that?
I'm not going to comment on the specifics of agendas in local jurisdictions. I'll just note that you should really take those concerns to your local elected officials and to the planners in your county. Obviously, items on a consent calendar do provide the opportunity for public comment, but I can understand your concerns about not having a lengthier discussion with elected officials on the item.
Great, thank you, Dave. We have a question from Tom. Have you considered adding contingency measures or sets of measures that would spring into action if initial progress on greenhouse gas emissions, jobs / housing displacement was not occurring?
I'm going to turn this one to my colleague Michael to answer.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. We're exploring this idea that's popular in the resilience community called adaptation pathways that kind of identify kind of multiple paths to an end goal depending on how interim actions go and how conditions from the outside also influence progress. So I think it's an interesting idea of how it might be, more adaptive to how progress is being made. We've also received a number of comments to date on can funding levels be supportive based on performance. So where we are seeing progress, can we continue to fund those efforts, and maybe where we're not seeing progress be more flexible with how we're funding or taking action. So I think that's an interesting idea of contingency measures. And I think as we enter into the implementation plan, which will start after the final blueprint phase later this fall, we're going to have to come up with creative ways to make sure that we're hitting our goals.
Great, thank you, Michael. We have a question from Bobby. How much is the western part of the county included in the long-range plans for things like housing, transportation, jobs, and sea level rise?
So I can jump in on this one and maybe turn it over to Michael a bit on the sea level rise topic. So Western Sonoma is really a beautiful place, and it is a place that in our plan is full of what we call priority conservation areas. These are places we want to protect. Our plan is not envisioning urban sprawl or significant amounts of growth in places like the Sonoma coast. The goal here is to focus that growth around our transit stations in places like Santa Rosa or Windsor or Petaluma. So that way we can protect those natural areas in places like Western Sonoma that are beautiful places for recreation and other uses. So the housing growth in those areas are relatively limited. So is the job growth. In terms of transportation, it's much more about maintaining our existing infrastructure as opposed to building new roads or major new transit investments. Michael, did you want to say anything about the sea level rise strategies on the Pacific coast?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that, but maybe we can take Carrie's question and I'll answer those together.
Sure thing, Michael. How does Plan Bay Area address hazards? As you know, Sonoma and Napa counties have been greatly impacted in recent years that will take the better part of a decade to recover from. We are working locally on how to plan better for hazards, but how is Plan Bay Area incorporating these strategies?
So we have talked a little bit about sea level rise already in the presentation, and that's a key integration of future climate impacts in Plan Bay Area 2050. We did look not just at the Bay, we did look out on the coast. Our process explored just kind of the nearest term sea level rise and the impacts that we expect over the next 30 years. And we didn't see as much impacted out on the outer coast. We will recognize that we weren't able to include things like erosion that are a bigger issue for the outer coast where you have the full force of the Pacific. But we'll be continuing to integrate sea level rise in future versions of Plan Bay Area. This was our first attempt to integrate it. As it relates to other hazards, we are aware that Sonoma County is a rich risk portion of the region. It's got earthquakes and recently wildfires. It also has flooding out there on the Russian River and elsewhere. So we are aware of those risks. We do have strategies specific to both earthquake and wildfire, looking to go into older buildings that were maybe developed before the Wildland Urban Interface Code in 2009 and various seismic codes over the past decades. So we do have a strategy in there to go into existing residential buildings and provide incentives to those homeowners to do work to reduce the likelihood of damage in a wildfire event or during an earthquake. So that's what we've done to date. It's the first time we've integrated hazards and their impacts directly into our planning process. We've learned a lot from local governments like Sonoma County that do a good job with their local hazard mitigation plans and community wildfire protection plans. And we're excited to continue to grow this element of Plan Bay Area in future iterations.
Thank you, Michael. A question from Paul. As we look at developing affordable housing, how does MTC decouple the problem of increased greenhouse gas emissions from the need to produce higher density, lower cost housing?
Paul, that's a good question, and it's complicated, so I'm going to try to break it into a few chunks. Just from a historical perspective, the land use pattern of distributed single-family homes with those homes far away from job centers or retail is part of the reason why the United States and the Bay Area, maybe to a little lesser extent, but still an issue here. It's part of the reason why we have such high usage of automobiles and such high greenhouse gas emissions per capita. And to tackle that challenge, it requires action on all fronts. So housing is part of that, focusing growth, having more mixed uses, having duplexes and triplexes and smaller scale apartment buildings. It doesn't always have to be very tall buildings. It can be in context with the community around it, but that sort of land use pattern helps to bring down greenhouse gas emissions with those mix of uses. But we also recognize housing isn't all of the challenge. We have to think about where jobs are located, and we have strategies on that front in the plan. We have to think about how to electrify our transportation infrastructure, encourage more telecommuting, provide better transit options. These are all different pieces of the same puzzle. So I think we recognize that housing is one key piece of it, but it's part of a broader suite of solutions.
Great, thank you, Dave. We have a comment and question from Tom. For the future, recommend PDA reform. How does MTC expect to meet its regional goals if local jurisdiction PDA nominations are not held to certain minimum transportation-oriented development criteria standards?
So Tom, I thank you for that comment. I think I've addressed this question in some of the previous comments at this point. And again, we would refer you to, you and your concerns about a specific PDA, again, to a local jurisdiction. I think we're going to move on to the next question.
Thank you, Dave. A question from Sheila. How will the fires figure into the future development to make sure some areas don't experience overhousing development?
Michael, would you like to answer that one?
I actually might need your help on this one just to make sure that I understand fully on how kind of the loss of such a huge portion of housing is playing a role.
Well, one thing I would say is the growth geographies that are the focus of Plan Bay Area 2050 specifically exempted areas of high fire risk to discourage future development in those very high fire risk zones. We all witnessed the fires up in the North Bay a few years back. And we need to be focusing more of our growth in the areas with low to moderate fire risk, the centers, maybe the centers of our cities that are not as close to that rural urban interface where fires often occur. So that is something that we definitely focused on. I don't know, Michael, if you want to speak a little bit to the home retrofit strategy, which also has a fire nexus.
Yeah, sure. So there is, it's in all of our materials identified as the modernize existing building strategy. And the idea there is that the more hardening strategies that happen on the kind of parcel itself, whether it's support for new roofs that are going to meet the WUI code as compared to kind of shingle roofs, as well as providing incentives for defensible space, particularly for the more expensive, more difficult investments like the removal of portions of trees. I think the question though is getting a little bit at just what happens with the fact that so much housing construction is needed to rebuild from the recent fires, and have we kind of accounted for that? And I'm not sure if we've done anything special in regard to incorporating kind of the expected high amount of housing construction that will be there for the recovery. I think we're looking at a 30-year time horizon, and so I think the housing growth is in addition to the housing units that were lost in that fire.
Thank you, David and Michael. And Sheila does have a follow-up comment. For instance, in Butte County, Chico experienced a high population growth more than predicted. And then another question from Tom, has MTC considered creating carrots or sticks to motivate small jurisdictions, i.e. those that would never be able to incorporate today, to require annexation of their immediately adjacent sprawl communities that function as de facto metro areas, for example, Sonoma Valley?
That's an interesting question, Tom. There has been a lot of discussion about the sheer number of local governments and special districts and the like across the region in recent months and years. That's not a policy role that we play, although there is actually a special agency that's within each county in California that focuses on those very issues of city boundaries. It's called Local Agency Formation Commission, and they exist in almost all the counties in the Bay Area. And they play a role in some of those questions about city boundaries, annexations, and the like. So I'm certain Sonoma has an equivalent of this. So I encourage you to check that out for more info.
Great, thank you, Dave. A question for Mary. Is water supply and emergency water shortage factored into where housing is being promoted?
So we did do some exploration into the water impacts of future growth in the Bay Area through our Horizon initiative, which was the precursor effort to Plan Bay Area 2050, where we worked with water districts to understand what types of uncertainty there were going into the future with water supply. Taking a look back at past forecasts as well as past demand. And I think a lot of the water districts in the most recent drought saw how resilient many of their water systems are. We do know that the North Bay is a little bit different than other portions of the region without access to some of the kind of key state systems, whether it's the Central Valley Project or the State Water Project. But we do work through the Environmental Impact Report to look at the impacts of water out into the future. Also ongoing, really right at this moment, all water districts in the region are working on what are called urban water management plans, UWMPs, that are updated in 2020. And those plans forecast out 25 years, making sure that they can provide reliable water service for the communities that they serve.
Great, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Dave. It looks like that was our last question. So thank you very much, everyone, for your input. We have captured all of the poll results, and your questions and comments on all of the input that we received today will feed into the blueprint and also be presented to our commission and ABAG executive board members in September. And so now I will turn it back over to Ursula, who will wrap up the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Michael. And thank you all for spending the last almost 2 hours with us today and providing your input. I do want to note that Rohnert Park Vice Mayor and MTC Commissioner Jake McKenzie was on the line for a little bit. So we appreciate that as well. I also want to remind you of ways that you can provide additional comments. Next steps for the draft blueprint include continuing public engagement through the public comment period, which ends on August 10th. The Commission and ABAG board will take action on the final blueprint this fall, and selection of the preferred environmental alternative will take place at the end of the year 2020. The adoption of Plan Bay Area is slated for fall 2021. To get additional information, next slide. To get additional information on the plan throughout the process and the draft blueprint, please go to planbayarea.org/blueprint for more information. There you can access background information and reports, such as the reports highlighted here today. You can also access the blueprint video at planbayarea.org/blueprint. Please do, it's a wonderful video animated in-house here at MTC ABAG. In addition, if you have more input to share, we want to hear from you. You can send written comments by this coming Monday, August 10th via email to info@planbayarea.org. And as we've mentioned a few times, we have a phone comment line. If you'd like to leave a verbal comment, please call 415-778-2292. And finally, we have an online form for you to provide written comments on our Plan Bay Area 2050 website. Go to planbayarea.org/blueprint and go to the public comments page, and you will see the form there. So we want to thank you again for spending your valuable time with us. We know that it's a really tough time for everyone out there, so we really appreciate it. If you'd like to share anything else, please email us at info@planbayarea.org. And as a final reminder, the last day to comment is this Monday, August 10th. And on behalf of the entire MTC ABAG staff, our commission, our ABAG board, this is our last workshop. We thank you so much for participating and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.